1, 2, 3, 4.
Well, everybody, welcome back to Behind the Pen. Here I have today with me Darran Handshaw. If you'd like to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi everyone. Thank you first of all for having me behind the pen.
My pleasure.
Excited to talk with you. So I am a science fiction fantasy author. I've been writing since around 2014, so I guess a little over 10 years. I have 2 novels out and some short story collections in the works, and just started working on another novel, a 3rd novel. So
Nice.
lots of exciting things that I can talk about.
The 2 novels you've written so far, are they a series or are they standalone?
They're each standalone in the same series. So
Oh,
I've had mixed reactions to that. Some people really love reading the first one, and they really, if they start reading the second one, they really want to read that first one. I've had other people that aren't so interested in the plot line of the first, and um, they pick up the second, and they say it's a very satisfying read by itself. So did my best to write it kind of as a standalone, just because of all the, people really don't want to pick up a book that with a series that's incomplete.
yeah,
So I
no.
would say the 2 books that I have out are really a complete story. Two complete stories. But one picks up right after the other.
I've gone ahead and read a series like that before where didn't know that it was a sequel till I was getting into it. And I've read this ones that like you're describing, they're standalone so you can pick up without knowing what else is going on and still an enjoyable read. So good on you for doing that. I think that was probably a pretty popular choice.
Thanks. Yeah, it comes out of some frustration, because I'm sure all of us have encountered some books, and you get to the end of it, and it's like, well, I thought I was getting a story, but now I'm in a huge series, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's not all out yet, so it can be a little disappointing. So for me, I think, especially my length of books, I write very long books. I would like to, if you buy my book, you'll get a nice encapsulated story.
Yeah, without it being left on a cliffhanger.
Right, exactly. So I do like to weave a lot of threads throughout the series and really the world that I write in.
Mm-hmm.
So all of the different books that I write in that setting are interconnected, but to have really standalone stories with that as well. So it might not be that everything gets wrapped up, but the main plot thread of the book will get wrapped up.
So, what are the books named, and can you tell us a little about them?
Sure, sure. So my first book that I published in 2017 is The Engineer. And it's really a story that's near and dear to my heart. So it's I call it the true story of how I met my wife. It was based on um, what actually happened in a online role playing text based game that I played years ago with my wife. She actually created the game. She co-created it with her friend Simon, and they built this whole world. And there was a big player base actually that played on there. So the main character in The Engineer is Actaeon, and that was actually my character on her game, and that's how I met her in the game. And the story of The Engineer really delves into the adventures of Actaeon and in this it's a ruined high-tech city. So it's like a futuristic, imagine New York City like 300 years from now, what you might imagine the technology being. And the phrase that gets kicked around a lot is, technology that's indistinguishable, sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of that in the setting with very advanced technology. That the characters really don't know how it works. They have more of a medieval understanding of things. And then the adventures of Actaeon, this engineer who's trying to really figure it out. A lot of people in the setting consider it to be magic, Some of them
Yeah.
worship it. Some of them try to harness it for power. Um, some of them are afraid of it, and they try to hunt down technological artifacts and destroy them. And
Mm-hmm.
Actan really wants to figure out how it works so that he can use it to solve problems and ultimately better his society that he lives in. So he's on these different adventures to try to discover those things and try to make sense of his world. And he kind of gets pulled up into this whirlwind adventure surrounding this Knight Arbiter who is this Knight Arbiter named Dissandra, and that was my wife's character. And she is a defender of this place called the Pyramid, which is the main setting of the stories. And Pyramid is this neutral kind of center that all of the different dominions that have kind of eked out their little corners in the city, and they've created their own civilizations. They come together in the Pyramid, and it's a neutral place so that they can work out diplomatic issues and trade and things like that without worry of attack. So, Sandra is this Knight Arbiter, and she's charged with defending that neutrality. So the Arbiters are this organization that really wants to create that neutral ground, if you will.
Well, I can safely say, that's kind of epic. That is definitely one of the more unique ways I've heard of two people meeting. And the fact that you went ahead and took that kind of game storyline and turned it into a book, it definitely sounds appealing from what you've described. And so, what...
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It was such a inspiring thing. I had started writing a lot of books previous to that. Basically, my whole life, I've always loved writing, and I've played a lot of those text-based role-playing games where there's just a lot of writing involved because you write several paragraphs about what your character does, and then somebody else takes a turn.
Yeah, I've had some experiences with those, and those are quite fun. I don't think they're really popular much anymore, but it's good to hear that something like that's still going on.
No, I actually played them previous to like MMOs when massively multiplayer online RPGs came out, and they were graphical. And a lot of people, there was a big exodus from those games because that was where it was at before the MMOs came out. And a lot of people were like, "Oh, graphics," and they left. And I found with those games. So the style I used to play a lot was multi-user shared hallucinations, or mushes, and that was less about rolling dice to decide what would happen and more about just writing what your character would do and sticking within the bounds of what you knew your character would be capable of. And when there was that big MMO exodus, the writing quality went through the roof. So it was really the people that loved writing
Who stayed.
that complete flexibility that was separated from the graphical interface of your character can still do anything. So that ultimate creativity. So things I think got a lot better with those settings because it was really isolated to the people that really just wanted to do role playing and writing.
Yeah, well, it's good to hear that that's still kind of something going on, or at least there's a... But is that something you still do, or is that something you've kind of stepped away from?
I've stepped away from it mostly because I was very involved in Redemption Mush, which Redemption's the name of the city in the setting of my novels, and so Redemption Mush was the game, and that was pretty much, I would say, it was the best game I had ever played going on there. I actually became a kind of a plot runner. They call it tiny plots on the setting. So I became almost like a DM. So I'd write a lot of stories, and I'd see how they panned out when the players interacted and stuff. So the story of the engineer, one of the main parts of it, I was actually involved in running it. So I ran the story, and just how it panned out was just so amazing. And I was like, wow, I really have to capture it. But that said, once Redemption Mush kind of fell apart, and those things really have a lot of volunteer workers in them. A lot of people have to put that time in to run the game, and people ran out of time at a certain point in the game. Eventually went away and had to be taken down. And after that, it was hard to try to get into something again because it was just such a great experience, So I've thrown my energy more into writing since.
Yeah, I know. The one couple of them I was into, it was fun. You got to see your character evolve, and you didn't have to necessarily build the world around them. The managers would go ahead and do that, and you got to explore and expand. And you're right, trying to get into another one after you came out of an excellent one, it just kind of sucks. But it's nice that you were able to
Yeah,
put a story along with it to kind of almost preserve and almost evolve it.
right. Yeah, and it's been pretty cool. But so my wife and her friend gave me permission to write in the game universe. Obviously, I was concerned. I didn't want to upset anybody, so I asked them for permission, and they said, "Yeah, this is a cool story. Why don't you write it and see where it goes?" And I've had the chance since then to really. If you're familiar with those games, there was a grid, which were the rooms that you could walk around in,
Mm-hmm.
that were actually built that you could see the descriptions of the areas and play in. You could role play in with your characters. So the grid was really centered around Pyramid, and it's been really fun. In I guess in the end of the Engineer, it branches out a bit more into more of the map of Redemption, the city as a whole. And then I wrote the book Dark Heart. The Dark Heart of Redemption was a continuation of the events after the story of the Engineer that really was never resolved in the book
Mm-hmm.
or in the game, if you will. So I really got to explore a lot of different settings in Redemption, and even in some cases beyond a little bit. And that was very fun because I got to flesh out those settings that nobody really wrote descriptions for. It was just like a place name on a map that nobody was ever able to visit, right?
Mm-hmm. So that's cool. I'm imagining that when you were doing that, there was a couple storylines going through your head that you were almost annoyed at that never got resolved, and so being able to go ahead and resolve those for not only yourself but anyone who else might read it, I imagine it probably brought some satisfaction along.
Yeah, and it was a fun thing to do because the Engineer, I knew what the ending was, right? I knew where it was going. It was an epic story that just happened, so I needed to novelize it. Obviously, I needed to make it into an easy to read novel with a through line and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So there was complexity there, but then the Dark Heart of Redemption didn't have an ending. I didn't know how it was going to end. So really weaving that whole tale together was my first experience with being able to um, really write my own story, not just almost like record a story as in the Engineer. So that was a really cool experience for me. And I was worried at first, am I going to pull off? Because I had all these different threads. They're 620-page books or so, 600.
Holy.
I think one's 600 and the other's 640 pages. So they're pretty big books where I lay out all these plot threads. And with the Dark Heart of Redemption, I really wanted to make sure they all came together in a way that made sense. It was really satisfying. And in the end, I have what I like to call I don't know if you've ever read Roger Zelazny.
I don't believe I have.
Yeah, I highly recommend him. One of my favorite books is his Amber Chronicles series. But he has these things in the books where he'll introduce all these different characters and settings and concepts and ideas. And he always has, or very frequently in his books, has this what I call a Zelaznian convergence at the end, where
Mm-hmm.
it's like all of the main players show up at the same time, and they all have this pivotal role in the end, and you just don't know where it's going to go because there's so many factors involved. And the Dark Heart of Redemption, it was really awesome because I got to do a Zelaznian style convergence, and it's very chaotic, and you don't know what's going to happen, who's going to survive, what the outcome's going to be, and I'm pretty happy with how it came out, and I've gotten some good, really great reviews on it. There were people that have given the book a try have really loved it. So that was a fun exploration for me.
Yeah, trying to get all those threads tied together. That is awesome. So was this just your kind of how you started writing? Was there you mentioned that you had tried to write a couple books beforehand?
Yeah, I've had really novel ideas, since even being a young adult, different fantasy or sci-fi stories that I wanted to explore. But I guess, never hooked by them enough to finish right?
Works
So
in
this was my
progress that
first.
kind of left in the boneyard.
Right. So the engineer was my first story that was really hooked enough to get to completion. And then at that point, I was like, wow, I really love the writing process. I like what it feels like. I work as a concept engineer for a tech company. That's my
Mm.
day job, and it was a very similar process of creation, from making a product to making a book. And it was, I could almost map it one to one, all the different components. It's so similar. But I had this ultimate creative freedom with books, and the one thing I had to wrap my head around was the duration of time it would take to write such a long novel. It was just
Yeah.
tremendous. Like for the engineer, it took 3 years. For Dark Heart, it took me 5 years. So just being able to wrap my head around, well, this is going to be a really long process, but just enjoy doing a little bit every week. So I write once a week.
Mm.
Eventually, I have a novel.
So, what is your writing process like? Kind of how do you go about it?
It's different, I guess, for different stories. Like the engineer, obviously, it was kind of pre-mapped. I knew it was going to happen. I just had to novelize it. I had to cut out the loose threads or weave them back into the story somehow, right? So there was a lot of, I had the outline for that really from the beginning. But Dark Heart, I had a lot of the threads, I would say, that I wanted to explore at the end of the engineer, and I wanted to weave them into a new story. That's basically centered around, it reads more like a military fantasy, I would say,
Ooh.
Dark Heart of Redemption. It starts in the middle of a war. So a war has begun.
Yep. There we go. That's gonna draw a lot of people in right there.
Yeah. So I wanted it to feel almost more like the Latin series, where they're fighting this epic battle, and there's a military unit, several military units, and they're trying to figure things out. And then I put Actaeon in almost a new position because he's an engineer. He's not particularly good at fighting, but he's very good at figuring problems out. And he ends up getting thrust into, because of the events of the engineer, he ends up getting thrust into this leadership position in the Dark Heart of Redemption. And because of that, he's got to figure out, well, how does he lead a military force? And he's very different than anything he's used to. Luckily for him, he's got his two bodyguards. He hires these two mercenaries in the engineer named Trench and Wave. And Trench is this really big guy with a trench scar across his face.
Ah,
He had
nice.
some big battle injury earlier in his life. And then Wave is like this, so he's like a giant with a heart of gold, and he's this ugly, scarred guy, but he's got your back no matter what. And then his buddy is Wave, and Wave fights, so Trench fights with this giant sledgehammer. He's kind of like a berserker style character.
Yeah.
And then Wave is his buddy, and he's a swordsman. So he's a duelist and swordsman, and he's kind of like a ladies' man, smaller guy than Trench, really concerned about his looks and his appearance. And, he's got, long hair and suave looks, and the two of them just are constantly bantering back and forth, which is, fun in the two books. You see their interactions and their banter and their big comic relief for the whole story. But Actaeon has Trench and Wave basically to use as advisors because they're experienced veterans from a war that happened before the story even begins.
Oh, yeah. I can
So that's fun to play off of.
definitely having some veteran advisors there would definitely help you not get your ass kicked in the war. But
Yep.
so,
Trench and Wave
yep.
are interesting. They were actually NPCs that I played in the game.
Really?
And they were loved. People would, send me messages, can I have just scenes with your NPCs? And they were supposed to just be supporting characters for my engineer character because he needed to hire defenders because, there's bandits and people trying to rob you if you go explore the ruins. So since he didn't really know super well how to defend himself, he needed these tough guys behind him. And when he starts to make money, he ends up hiring those two.
All right. Well, I can definitely say that is that's not just a reskin of any other book out there. It definitely got a unique premise on it. And
Yes. Yep. Weird setting. Actually, a lot of readers pinged me afterwards because I had a lot of people that really like classic sci-fi that
yeah,
read my book, and you know, it's written more. It's written third person omniscient, so it's written more like I'm not gonna put you inside the character's head where you see every little thought. Maybe occasionally you'll get a thought if it's really pertinent to the omniscient narrative, but for the most part, you're just seeing the events unfold, and you can kind of determine, you know, the reader gets to decide, you know, how is the character feeling, and you see the character's reactions and stuff like that. So you can put yourself in their shoes, but it's written more like the old classic sci-fi novels and fantasy novels, I would say. A lot of those readers that enjoyed my story said, "Hey, you got to check out Eyeing Earth by Jack Vance, which is very similar." And I had never read it before that. And there was another book, Nonstop by Brian Aldiss, which highly recommend. I loved Nonstop, but I never read it until readers that enjoyed my book said, "Hey, your books remind me of these books." So it's been done before, that Dying Earth genre, where Earth is way far into the future, and some cataclysm has occurred to lower the state of technological understanding, and now humans are, you know, kind of in this sufficiently advanced technology that's indistinguishable from magic, right? It's fun. It's fun to explore that. Redemption is most likely a non-Earth setting. I'm not gonna spoil anything, but it's really more of a fantastical setting. So it's not like you'll see places like New York City and stuff like that left behind. It's more of that fantastical imagining of it.
that's honestly normally the books I'm familiar with. The author does go ahead and go through lengths to kind of show what's going on in the character's head, what their thought process is. But so you leaving it kind of open to the reader to interpret that and almost put themselves in the shoes and decide for themselves what the character's feeling. It, I imagine, probably hooks them in so they can almost feel like they're walking in the character's shoes.
Yeah, one thing that has always frustrated me is like some authors will write a lot of the POV chapters, right? When you get the POV chapter, some of the POVs are not fun to be in, and I'm sure you've experienced that. I've found out with some of those books, even if I'm loving the series, I get to those POV chapters and I'm like, I'm not having a fun time. Like one that I always go to is Sansa Stark in Game of Thrones. In the Song of Ice and Fire series, when I had to do POV chapters with her, I was not having fun. It was a character that I couldn't relate to at all, and I didn't like being in her head, right?
Yeah, that kind of just speaks to the personal tastes of readers and authors. After all, writing is an art like anything else, and it's extremely subjective. So just kind of that polarization, kind of the different looks at it. Yeah, no, I can definitely understand the feeling of that. Like if you're someone who gets very involved with the characters you're reading, to be in the head of someone that you just kind of despise, yeah, I can imagine that'd be a pretty unpleasant experience. Yeah, I'm guilty of definitely doing a lot of the POV chapters, especially when it comes to my main characters. That's main characters almost always write POV, but the definitely not knocking the third person omniscient. That is an excellent way to go when you read trying to fully almost be that character. So definitely, and kind of looking at the Amazon for your books, you know, normally you're not like someone's novels would come out between 300 and 400 pages. That's just kind of a standard length. And I'm looking here, your first one is, let's see, yep, that's the engineer. It's 602 pages, and the Dark Heart of Redemption is 781. So you're talking about you.
781. I think you're probably looking at the ebook. I think if you look at the print, it's 640.
640 still, like you're talking about your when someone gets one of your books, they're getting about twice as much book as normal.
Yes, and it's interesting as we can kind of segue into what I'm working on, what I've been working on the last few years, because I released Dark Heart in 2022. But I think, yeah, you're getting your bang for your buck, certainly if you buy my books. But they're 225,000 word.
Holy crap!
Yeah, so they're big novels. I wanted to be able to really explore all the different threads, get to know the characters. And they say if you read through it and it doesn't have anything to do with the characters or the story, cut it, right? If story wouldn't suffer from the cut it. And I believe in that. So that said, that 225,000 words is all scenes that I think really benefit the story and really help the reader connect with the story and the characters. So there's not just like people sitting around in a tavern talking about nothing, right? I try to go from pertinent scene to pertinent scene and really show that kind of advancement and characterization and plot.
I can only imagine how big it. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
That said, it's like I feel like this story should be as long as it needs to be told. So I remember when I was deciding between like, should I try a pub or even try at that, or should I go indie pub? And I was like, you know what? Everyone's saying it's got to be less than 100K words, and I'm just not willing to chop up the story like that and really take away the crux of that story in order to, or all those cool details to fit into some publisher's vision of what a book should be. I think a book should be what it needs to tell the story.
Yeah, I actually kind of got into a discussion about that. Last one of these I did, I believe his name is Michael, last author I had on here. But the difference between independent and traditional publishing, independent, yeah, you may not be as successful, but you're going to have a lot more creative freedom. So...
Right, and that's what I wanted to get out of this. Like that's what I have fun with. And especially the engineer being such a personal story to me is like, I don't want somebody to come back and go, I don't like that Actaeon is this. And it's like, well, wait a second. That's an important character to me. So I'm not willing to give up that creative freedom at this point.
And I've read some, but you find in the older novels, like really coming into the 20th century, you'll find the longer books like that. When you're looking at, like, a good example is the Three Musketeers. Like, the original book was a hefty book. You could probably kill somebody with it. But at the same time, you have a lot going on. You're getting a full world. You're getting all these characters coming in, and they're not dead. You're giving them enough screen time, or page time, I guess, so that they become living characters someone can identify with. And if you can't take away from it, you can't take away. Yeah, someone who's used to writing or reading a 50-page book is probably going to say, that's not for me. But someone who genuinely enjoys stories and getting immersed into other worlds, they're not only getting a bang for their buck, they are getting everything they could ask for and more. So definitely not cutting away. And I can only imagine how long your book would be if you had any scenes that were quote-unquote fluff. Just kind of scenes that are kind of funny, don't really move the story along. You're telling me that basically every scene is in that book is necessary in that book. Holy crap. That is amazing.
And I love to work, like, obviously the funny moments and the character building moments are really important. But you can work them into important scenes too. And that's one of the things I love with Trench and Wave, because they'll go at each other with banter and funny dialogue, and create very comical moments, but moments that still advance the story.
Yeah.
At the same time.
And I have to say, definitely impressive. And when we're talking about the word limit that they go ahead and like the traditional publishers typically like to look at under 100,000. It's when you've got a story like the one you're describing, there's no way you're going to get it under 100,000, especially when you're trying to do a standalone book like that.
Well, I've had some people suggest maybe take the engineer, break it into 3 parts, and actually got a few critical reviews saying I should do that. But then when I thought about it, and I really looked at it, and it was that same thing. Like, if you're going to buy my book, I want you to have a fully encapsulated story. And I felt like if I broke it up into 3 sections, you weren't going to be satisfied after one. It wasn't a good story by itself. You be left hanging and frustrated. And the same thing with the other two parts. So I made a decision not to, all feedback is good to have, but some feedback you don't take, right?
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
that to me was something to stay away from and really keep that out.
No,
That
absolutely.
said, it's a long book you really can get into, and you can really immerse yourself if you want that. But I've been finding recently, like when I released The Engineer, I actually had a lot of sales. I probably sold in the time, mainly the big bulk of it before I released Dark Art of Redemption. I probably sold almost 1,000 books.
Holy
over
crap.
1,000 now. Yeah, so I've had good sales on it, but around the time I released Dark Art of Redemption, they say, you're supposed to see a boost in the sales of the original when you release the sequel. And I saw actually the sales had started going down before I released, and they just continued going down.
Well, then
So
again,
I was like,
yeah.
the only thing I could attribute that to is because I wasn't getting bad reviews. I wasn't getting readers that said they didn't like the book. But I did get a lot of people. I would give them copies of the book, and they'd say, I think it's just too long. Or some people would say, I've bought it already, but I never got a chance to read it because it's too long. So I think people's, I guess, recently, people's will to read that really big book, that huge book, has gone down, and now they really want something shorter. So that's what I've been working on more recently, in the last few years, shorter fiction to try to release for people.
Well,
so that's why right now I have two short story collections. One of them should be coming out this month or the next month. I'm working on final formatting for it.
Yeah.
And so I could talk to you about that a little bit if you're.
Yeah, we can go to that here in a minute. Kind of going back to the all feedback type thing. There was, definitely when there's scenes there or sections there where you're like, I don't really want to take this out. It completes the story. And ultimately, when an author writes, it definitely should be for entertainment, but especially it's the story that they would want to read. Like, that's why you get such varied books, is because you've got the authors going, hey, this isn't a story that I genuinely enjoy creating, and if someone comes along and says, hey, I don't like the story, how you've written it, well then, yes, it's maybe something to look into on future books, but you're not going to go ahead and change your entire book or entire series just because someone's like, hey, it's too long. There was actually some feedback I got from my last one, my standalone novel, where there was a scene that I had been building up to throughout the entire book for the main character's, like, his full motivation, and it came to it, got through the scene, and I actually had one of my beta readers talk to me about it later and go, yep, I don't really think the scene was necessary. And I'm going, well, you may not think that, but that's something that I have been building up towards. So someone going, hey, this book's too long, and you're going, well, it's something I enjoy to read, that's ultimately what it should be about.
Yeah, that's why you should always, I think, as an author, be humble and be willing to consider anyone's comment. Then at the same time realizing, well, this is a small cross-section of your potential readers, and it might not be necessarily the book for them, or every scene might not be for them. Because I've had people tell me early on in the story, I don't like this part of your book. I think you should change it. And then I've gone and had people write in reviews, I loved this aspect of the book. It's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not going to make everybody happy. You should,
Yeah.
But you do want to make sure the structure is sound. Obviously, your grammar and your spelling, you need to have it properly edited. You can't have plot holes and things.
Yeah.
Right? And you should also have consistent character behavior. I see that a lot. The character does something for the advancement of the plot, but it doesn't make any sense from the character's perspective.
Yeah. It's like, well, why would they do this? They're acting completely different from how they were. It just kind of breaks that immersion. And when you go, and I don't know if anyone listening is aware of the suspension of disbelief, but when we go watch a movie or read a book, we have a tendency to forget it's not real. That's just so we can be entertained. And when you break immersion, there is something that happens, whether a technical glitch, spelling error, or as we were just talking about, when there's a character that acts completely different, that tends to break the immersion and pull you out, and it just kind of ruins the experience. It's like finding a bone in your pudding. It's like, wait, that doesn't make any sense to be there. So,
Yep, yeah, and then you're just thinking about that for the rest of the experience. Wait a second, it should have been this, or this didn't make any sense.
yeah, absolutely. But it definitely is important in the end to have a solid book because, again, it's going to be subjective. Some people are going to be interested, some people aren't. You just don't want any of the complaints being for technical detail. But you said that you were working on a couple short story collections.
Yep, so I have two collections. One of them is going to be probably next year sometime. It's Tales from Redemption, so it's a lot of loose ends and other characters I wanted to explore surrounding the whole Redemption universe, and that should be a lot of fun. It reminds me a lot of Tales from the Loop. I don't know if you saw that series on, I think it's on Amazon Prime. Great sci-fi series if you haven't seen it.
I don't believe I have, but continue.
All the short stories are kind of standalone little short stories, but they're all weaved together in the same universe. So you'll see like echoes of different other characters in each short story, and things that were going on. So I think people that read Engineer and Dark Heart should really love that because it answers some questions they had about the universe. The one that I'm really excited to talk about today is a sci-fi mystery short stories collection that basically is following two characters that are solving tech mysteries, including Actaeon and a new night investigator character, and it's going to be called Artifacts and Enigmas.
Oh, you don't really find a lot of mystery sci-fi, so definitely if you've got any details to share about it, please.
Yeah, so it's like I always like to say Actaeon was like a medieval MacGyver character, if you're familiar with the MacGyver series.
Oh, absolutely.
Yep. So if you like MacGyver, you'll like Actaeon. He doesn't fight his way out of things. He engineers his way out of bad situations.
1 second for just to kind of anyone listening who isn't aware of MacGyver. It was an older series where the main character, rather than relying on strength or charisma, he was very smart. He also knew a lot of well, don't know if engineering is quite the correct term, but it's the joke of making a car run with a paperclip and a thing of duct tape. He would take very unconventional engineered solutions to the various problems. And so kind of seeing it all come together, he was definitely using his brains, and he would outsmart his opponents by using little things to, well, I guess engineer great solutions. So please continue.
Yeah, the fun thing about MacGyver, and one thing I love doing to Actaeon is, Actaeon carries this, he carries a halberd, and the halberd could also be used as a pry bar, like a large pry bar. It could be used as a hook, so he fashioned the blade so it could be used as a hook. So everything he carries with him has multi-purpose capabilities. So it's kind of like MacGyver's pocket knife, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's got a bunch of things in his jacket pockets that he could use for different things. One of the things I love doing, and it's what happened on MacGyver all the time, is I love throwing Actaeon into this life or death situation where he's going to die if he doesn't do anything, and he has to use just the stuff that he has on him and immediately around him to survive.
Yeah, having to pull something out of almost nothing in order to take care of an impossible problem.
So there are some things in the book where he can actually sit around and spend time inventing and designing something. Then there's other points where he's got minutes to engineer a solution, or him and the people he's with are dead. And so if you like that, if that sounds interesting, that's the engineer in a nutshell. And then you can imagine Dark Heart of Redemption in a war where he's doing that. So he's kind of he's the MacGyver character, right? And then I've been saying about this Artifacts and Enigmas series, it's MacGyver meets Sherlock Holmes.
Oh.
So imagine Sherlock Holmes can't figure mystery out because there's a tech mystery, and now he needs MacGyver to figure it out. You know, he needs that engineer. So Actaeon's the engineer, and then there's a new character that I introduced named Aethelgard, and he is a night investigator. So he works for the same organization that Sandra worked on from the first books, or worked in, but she was more of just a warrior there. Aethelgard is a Sherlock Holmes style investigator where he just knows everything about human behavior and no trace. You know, everything leaves a trace, and how to pick up on those traces, and how to look at somebody and tell a bunch of things about them based on how they're dressed or walking or whatever. That's a lot of fun to explore with that character, and to combine their two, real mental capabilities and talents into where Actaeon's going to be really good at some stuff and Aethelgard's going to be better at other things, and together they complement each other. So I could read you, if you want, I could read you the back matter from that novel that's going to be released hopefully next month.
Absolutely. Please go right ahead.
So on the back, so it's Artifacts and Enigmas, Mysteries from Redemption. And then I have a quote excerpt from something one of the two main characters says is, "The truth always comes into the light." So the story is, Aethelgard is a night investigator in the Pyramid, the political center of the ancient shattered city known as Redemption. As a master of observation and deduction, nothing gets by him. But when confronted with mysteries involving deadly and mysterious artifacts of the ancients, even he knows when to ask for help. That's where Actaeon, the renowned prince engineer of Raydell, comes in. Both are experts in their own domains, and with their combined minds on the case, no crime will remain unsolved. Going to act in eighth as they set out to investigate mysteries beyond imagining. These 11 strange tales straight out of science fiction will baffle and delight, including, after an artifact hunter is killed in Capsule, a broken image projector left behind reveals secrets from the far past. And in Memory's Edge, a deadly killer uses an artifact spear to commit public executions of readers that work in an archive of the ancients. Another one is, people are compelled to enter an artifact room that kills them in the Sapphire Crucible. A woman and her attacker disappear into thin air on the Avenue of Glass, which leads the investigators straight into Retribution's maw. And as an engineering team works to repair an ancient transport machine in the Tubeway murder, one of them dies in a suspicious manner. With their collective intellect, can this unlikely team keep the denizens of Pyramid safe? Or will they meet their match when they encounter Aethelgard's old nemesis? That's it.
Now that is a convincing sales pitch. That MacGyver meets Sherlock Holmes in sci-fi. I think I'm gonna be looking out for this book. But
Good. So it's 11 short stories that are just standalone short stories, but if you read them in chronological order, you'll see kind of the advancement of the two characters as they work together and how their relationship evolves, right?
that, yeah. Yeah, I know I'm going to look forward to it. I don't know about anyone else, but I'll definitely be looking forward to that. Just kind of a...
Yeah, and if you want, when you're ready, if you want, I could read an excerpt from one of the short stories.
I mean, if you want to go ahead and do that now, you can feel more than free to.
Okay, up to you.
No, I'm just the guy asking the questions. This is definitely kind of get an eye on your work, so if you wanted to do that sometime later, we could definitely set something up. If you wanted to do that now, that's definitely up to you. But kind of whichever way you want to go with it.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it now if you'd like me to.
Oh, let's go ahead. Yeah, go ahead and give us something. Sneak peek.
Very, very cool.
Exclusive
So
sneak peek.
Yep. So yeah, and I've actually never even talked about the title before. That it's Artifacts and Enigmas. So you were the first to hear it.
Oh, yeah. I'm liking that.
So the title of this short story is The Sapphire Crucible. Aethelgard and Actaeon have been working together for, I think, a little over a year. They've had a few cases together where Aethelgard pulled Actaeon in as he needed his help, right? It was beyond his capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
So here we go, the Sapphire Crucible. In the end, they just laid down to die, said Ethelgard. The night investigator and Prince Engineer stood amidst horrific devastation in an artifact room deep down in the bowels beneath the pyramid. The journey had taken them a good portion of the morning as they traveled through a winding maze of tunnels beyond the warrens near the open marketplace. The ball-shaped room had sliding doors at opposing sides, one of which they had entered. A glowing red prismatic pillar took up the center of the room, radiating heat that flushed Actaeon's face even as he looked at it. In various places on the floor were piles of ash roughly shaped like supine humans. The only remains were daggers, rings, clasps, and other jewelry the unfortunate victims had been wearing. "How did you locate this place?" asked Actaeon, pulling his goggles down over his eyes to protect them against the waves of heat being thrown off by the pillar. "Gamer Yip Monjada kept complaining to me about disappearing Ajmani," said Ethelgard, pushing his lenses up his nose. "He insisted upon my delving into the tunnels to find out where they disappeared to." "The Rajah's portent?" "The one and only." Ethelgard smirked at the engineer and knelt beside one of the ash piles, wincing at the pain in his knee. "I would expect a person being incinerated to move, thrash about perhaps, not lie perfectly still. There is a missing piece here, a poison perhaps, or an artifact. That's why I asked you here. Somehow these people were all brought here and rendered into a state that made them accept their fate." The arch of a brow, Actaeon asked the obvious question. "How did you determine they were alive at the time? This could simply be a killer's method to conveniently dispose of their victims." "Fair question," said Ethelgard. "How do you suspect I found this chamber? I was able to track one of the missing persons here. The passage of a person leaves many signs in these centuries-old tunnels. The scuff of a boot heel, the fleeting touch of a finger found in the dust on a tunnel wall, the scrape of a staff evident in the settled dirt. These 6 unfortunate individuals made their way here along 4 different paths. All of them I can account for." He lifted the charred remains of a boot sole. "All 6 of the victims. None other came this way in many decades. At least not before the pair of us." "Fascinating," said Actaeon. "So you could not account for a killer, which means..." He leaned forward to investigate the nearest pile of remains. When he shined his luminary upon it, several large metallic blue beetles scattered and fled from the room. "Amazing." He leaned forward more until he could make out the object that he thought he'd seen near one of the places in the ash from which the beetle had fled. Ethelgard joined him over the ash pile and lifted a hollow, charcoal-textured hemisphere. "Good eyes, my friend. I knew I was right to bring you here." Ethelgard handed him the shell. "An egg, right?" "Yes," concluded Actaeon. "I do believe it is an egg. One of those beetles must have hatched from it. Let us see if we can find more." He sifted through the ash of the victims until they had the broken shells of more than 10 eggs. Actaeon deposited them in a pouch, and he then returned to his jacket. Together they also gathered any recognizable belongings for aid in identifying the victims. That was when they both noticed something strange. They weren't alone. Ethelgard drew his right blade, and the stifling hot chamber filled with the odor of ozone. He pointed the right blade at the man standing behind him. The middle-aged, blond man smiled and lifted a hand. "Hello, friend. My name is Garvin." He was dressed in a white cotton tunic stained in places with different colors and leather breeches that were tucked neatly into tall boots. The Arbiter narrowed his cobalt eyes on the man. "I am Night Investigator Ethelgard. My friend here is Engineer Actaeon. What, may I ask, is a dyer doing this deep in the tunnels?" Garvin looked as though he hadn't considered that himself. "Didn't you also feel it?" He spread his hands and gestured toward the pillar at the center of the room. "It was calling me here. I didn't realize it at the time, but it was." As an afterthought, he sighed and added, "It feels good to be here." "You shouldn't be here, lad," said Ethelgard. "You aren't even armed. What if a rune crawler takes to your liking?" Garvin frowned. "Well, one didn't, clearly." Actaeon and Ethelgard exchanged a look. The man moved off to one side and smiled up at the pillar as he settled down to his knees before it and closed his eyes. "A different approach, then," muttered Ethelgard. He sheathed his right blade in its ceramic scabbard and stepped between Garvin and the artifact pillar. "You The Order of Arbiters has deemed this area to be unsafe. I'm afraid I must ask you to leave at once. Garvin opened sleepy eyes and shook his head. You have no authority here. This isn't even a pyramid. Ethelgard grabbed the man's arm and received a bite from him that he was entirely unprepared for. He punched Garvin in the head and sent him sprawling to his feet. No, shouted the manic Dyer. I will not go. I just got here. Leave me alone. A flash at Ethelgard's back was the first sign that something was very wrong. Eighth, we had best go, suggested Actaeon. Now. Prismatic pillar's glow began to increase in brightness until it was near blinding. On opposite ends of the room, the doors started to slide shut. Halberd forward, Actaeon ran over to attempt to wedge the door open. He barely made it in time and managed to thrust the shaft of his weapon through the narrowing opening. A crack heralded the failure of his halberd as the door snapped the metal reinforced shaft of the weapon completely in two as it completed its effort to close. The bowl-like room was closed and the heat instantly became unbearable. They were sealed in their tomb. Ethelgard leaned down to pull Garvin to his feet. The man flailed about and kicked at him like a toddler in a meltdown. He cringed and gritted his teeth as the bare skin at the back of his hand began to burn. Forget him, said Actaeon. The engineer pulled a cloth from his jacket and wrapped it around his head to keep off the radiant heat. Blisters rose on the back of his left hand as he did so. He briefly considered the blue fire concoction in his jacket, but realized he didn't have the time, and the blue fire most likely hadn't the power to melt through the door. Ah! Cried Ethelgard. He dropped his cane and covered the back of his head to protect it, feeling his hands burn. In front of him, Garvin lay still and content as blisters began to rise on his face. Get over here now, called Actaeon. I need your help. Ethelgard dashed over, feeling the soles of his boots sticking to the curved floor of the room. Actaeon wrapped a cloth around his friend's head. The engineer gritted his teeth as his left hand and right fingers began to burn. It broke your halberd, said the night investigator. It has been an honor, my friend. Cut it out, said Actaeon. The Prince Engineer reached down and drew the right blade from Ethelgard's scabbard. He directed the crackling weapon toward the door and sliced a vertical swath through it. A painful glance back toward the Dyer showed that the man's clothing was already beginning to smoke and smolder. Garvin was much closer to the glowing pillar than they were, and would die quickly if nothing was done. The wooden cane that Ethelgard had dropped had already ignited where it lay closest to the glowing pillar. Ethelgard narrowed his eyes to thin slits and rushed forward to rescue the man, while Actaeon continued to cut their way out. He grabbed Garvin's arm and pulled him toward the door, but the Dyer flailed and flopped like a dying fish, tugging Ethelgard even closer to the pillar of death. He kicked the man in the head to try to get him to stop, but it only intensified his efforts to escape. What are you doing? Don't you see that you'll die here? Leave me be, pleaded Garvin. A rush of hot air flowed past Ethelgard, headed in the direction of the door. A glance found that Actaeon had finished the cut and exited the chamber. The Prince Engineer peered through the hole in the door, with goggle-clad eyes that poked through the wrap around his face. The top of his hair was on fire. Forget him, mate. Move! A big blister on the back of his hand burst, and Ethelgard realized that if he kept trying to rescue this man, he would die in here with him. Rest well, Garvin, said Ethelgard, letting his arm slip through his burning hands. Thank you, whispered the dying man through blistering lips. Ethelgard turned and fled through the door. The shock of the cooler air that hit him on the other side made him pass out. He awoke a moment later to Actaeon dragging him down the tunnel and away from the artifact room that nearly killed them both. And that's it for that scene.
Well, damn! I got...
Putting them in bad situations, you can tell.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, my favorite part of that was basically the guy going, "Stop being dramatic," as he started cutting through the door.
Yeah, we're not done yet. We're not giving up.
That's... Yeah, no, that was awesome. And yeah, folks, you heard it here. First exclusive look at the new upcoming short story. So, you're welcome. But thank you for sharing that. That was, I think that'll whet many people's appetites.
Yeah, I hope so. And you know, it's exciting to be able to release those short stories. And it's really the first time I've worked at those formats. It's an interesting writing format to really try to keep a story so concise.
Nothing like trying a new writing style to. Sorry.
World building setting like Redemption, right? A heavy world building setting.
Yeah, it's nothing like a new writing style to kind of throw you out of your comfort zone.
Yep. I would highly recommend though writers writing short stories because I think coming out of this, I've written 11 short stories for this collection and 11 for the other one, and so now I've got 22 short stories under my belt, and I think I'm a much better writer coming out of it.
Definitely.
I've learned a lot.
And it's what's very nice about short stories is when you know you're lacking in a certain area, you can write the short story specifically for that. It's like anything, writing is a skill that you need to hone, that you need to train, you need to work at, and being able to take that and instead of going, I'm going to write a perfect short story, going, I'm going to try to advance how I write, it is an incredibly useful skill.
Yep, yeah, and the mysteries for me were outside of my comfort zone. I'm not a mystery fan in general, but my boss got me into the Sherlock Holmes collection, the
old one,
stories.
yeah.
And I thought they were an interesting way to tell stories about, especially the world. A lot of the Sherlock Holmes stories really delve into the victims and the in some cases the criminals and why did they do what they did, which can be a really interesting vehicle to teach people more about different places and in redemption and really explore the world more, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we're going to go. We've actually been at this for almost an hour now. So I think we're going to look at wrapping up. But before we do, is there any advice, any tidbits you want to give people who are just starting out writing?
I think the biggest thing, and I always say this, is I meet a lot of people that hear I wrote a book, and a lot of them say, I always wanted to write a book. I've got some book ideas, right? And they seem pretty passionate about that, and they often want to tell me about their book idea, which is great. And I always tell them, we'll start writing it. And they say, well, it's got to be so long and so much effort. And I love to share my process because I write one time a week. And I try to set a few hours aside that week. You know, it's 2 to 3 hours once a week. And in the end, I have a 600-page novel. And in some cases, like with Dark Heart, it took me 5 years to write it. I also was working full time, had a young child, and I was the chief of a fire department, a volunteer chief of a fire department.
Oh.
So I was very busy during that time, but still, even with everything going on, I was able to sit down once a week and eventually crank out a novel. So if you have that story idea and you really want to write it, I am proof of point. If you write on a regular cadence and you just make sure you sit down once a week or once a month or whatever you can do, you will eventually have that novel. So don't just leave it in your head your whole life. Take that time aside and write it, and I think you'll really enjoy the process in the end. And just get over the fact that it's going to take forever, because it really does.
Yeah.
Go for it.
And it's definitely, every first draft is definitely going to be shit. But you got to get it out there in order to make it something that's readable.
Yeah, so if you get down, and the more you write, obviously we all know, the more you write, the more you're going to get better experience. And, the other thing I would say, too, is for people that are writing, is make sure you do, you still want to seek an editor and have other people look at it, but fully edit your first novel. Don't just say, yeah, I'm going to send it to the editor. It's fine. You'll send it to the editor at some point. But first, fully edit it by yourself.
Good advice.
The reason being is I fully edited the engineer, and then I gave it to somebody to edit, and then because of my experience editing the engineer, my writing was so much tighter in the Dark Heart of Redemption. I did not make any of those editing mistakes that I suffered from, and took a lot of time to spend to correct those mistakes, right, for the engineer. So it was so much faster that process with Dark Heart of Redemption. And you spend more time on the creative aspects, right?
Yeah.
As I'm writing, I'm looking for those pitfalls and I'm avoiding them.
All right. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up there. Yep. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate you taking the time and letting me share an excerpt from my short story collection. So,
Absolutely.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. And everyone, again, that's Darran Handshaw. Now, the Engineer, both of his books are currently up on Amazon. Looking at the Engineer, again, he's talking about it's 600 pages. It's $5.99 on Kindle, paperback $17.24, hardcover's $28, and he also has Dark Heart of Redemption up there. Same price for the Kindle, paperback $17.85, hardcover's $29. But again, you're getting about 2 books in for this. So yeah, go ahead and check him out on Amazon. Check him out on his Twitter or X handle. He's got a Darran Handshaw, and that's at Engineer 7601. So go ahead and definitely go check him out, guys.